Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Palmer. Let's talk about it. So Palmer is an Apple TV Plus original film that is directed by Fisher Stevens and stars Justin Timberlake as the titular character, who is this ex-convict who has just gotten out of prison and is trying to make a life for himself, but he ends up getting saddled with this child who's called Sam, and he pretty much develops a very touching and emotional and close bond with this child who is living in some pretty dangerous, horrible conditions, and he is very vulnerable at this moment in time. And so Palmer and Sam develop this really, cute father-son relationship that we kind of see unfold throughout this film. When it comes to my reviews, I'm very aware that I tend to skew towards spoilers. I tend to skew towards spoilers and talking about the intricacies of the film and what exactly happens and breaking it down thematically and by character arcs and all of that. But when it comes to this one, what I just told you is sufficient for you to have basically seen the whole thing. After hearing my summary, you basically know what's going to happen in this film, and whatever you're thinking, whatever you're theorizing, you're correct, because this is such a predictable kind of Oscar baity film that honestly you would have to have never watched a film ever before, just any film ever before, to not be able to predict what's going to happen from the onset of this one. Now, I'm still going to dive into my thoughts on this one throughout this review, but before we dive into those, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Okay, let's talk about it. First of all, let's dive into what I actually enjoyed, because even though I did find a lot of it to be quite underwhelming, I did still have a good time with it. I did still leave with a warm feeling in my soul, in my cold soul after watching the film, so it must have done something right. And first of all, we have, of course, Justin Timberlake at the center of this one. He's back at it again with the acting. Okay, and whilst I do still think that he's a better singer and performer than he is an actor, I think he does a decent job here. I think he sells the role pretty well. He is very subdued. He is very turned down, and I guess it makes sense for this kind of role to have a kind of hardened ex-con who's just trying to make it in life, who's just trying to pick up the pieces after the ruin that was left when he was arrested and put into prison for 12 years. So it makes sense that he's a very subdued character who's just laying low. He's not trying to get into anyone else's business. He's just trying to mind his own and make a future for himself after the last 12 years have basically been wasted away in prison. But overall, Justin Timberlake's portrayal of Palmer works quite well. He does form a very convincing bond with Ryder Allen's Sam, and I do think that the moments where they share that emotion, they share that care that they have for one another, in particular when Ryder, to be fair, shows the affection that he has for Palmer and shows how much he cares for him and sees him as basically a father figure, I think that's what really sells that relationship. And I do think that when we do see those breakthrough moments where we realize how much these characters mean to each other, it's what really sells the emotional aspect of this story. And I do think that, like I said, Justin Timberlake delivers in those moments. Now, Palmer does also happen to form a romantic relationship with Sam's teacher in this film, who's portrayed by Alicia Wainwright, and I do believe that she's the actress that Justin Timberlake got in a bit of hot water for. I vaguely remember that being some drama because there was some set pics of, I believe, this film where Justin Timberlake was a little too snuggly, a little too close and cuddly with the actress. But for all of the drama that surrounded that, I didn't see half as much of the chemistry as I thought I would be seeing in light of everything that happened off screen, okay? I don't think that their relationship was the most convincing. I mean, it's cute, their interactions are cute and their kind of romantic moments are cute, I guess, they're fine, but I would have liked to see a little bit more spice between them, a little bit more chemistry between them, especially because this is a very predictable film, like I said, so it's all in the execution, and I don't think that that relationship played out in a very compelling way. At the very least, the one between Sam and Palmer felt quite convincing and heartfelt. Juno Temple is also in this, and I'm more familiar with her in another Apple Apple TV Plus project, that of course being Ted Lasso. I think she's phenomenal in that show. Here, she was kind of exaggerative to me, especially at a certain point where, small spoilers I guess, but she comes back from being on this drug binge with her boyfriend or her partner or someone, basically the person who's been abusive towards Sam. She comes back like halfway through the film and she's, you know, very much in a state. She's obviously been using a lot of drugs and she's not quite with it. She's very high and she's not quite in her right mind, and I feel like Juno was she was acting it up, okay? She was doing a little bit too much in those scenes, in my opinion. I think especially when you contrast with just how plain everything else was, like her performance really stood out like a sore thumb as being quite exaggerative in moments and quite explosive, and not necessarily in a good way. Like I said several times now, this film was quite predictable. We've seen stories like this time and time again. The story of the gruff and grizzled older man who has to take care of this cherub child, and as a result they have this really cute relationship where they start to care for one another, and the old man wants to protect that child, and so he'll do whatever it takes to make sure that child is safe and happy and healthy, and in the end they have an incredible father-son or father-daughter relationship together and they live happily ever after. Like, we've seen it time and time again, and this is no exception. What I did find particularly interesting, especially after seeing the trailers for this film, was the added element of Sam being this gender non-conforming character. Now, he is an 8-year-old child who doesn't quite grasp the ideas, the concepts surrounding gender and gender roles in society, but he already knows what he likes, and what he likes happens to be things that are traditionally seen as being girly or targeted towards young girls, like princesses and makeup and, you know, princess TV shows and costumes and all sorts. And those happen to be the things that he enjoys. Those happen to be the things that he finds comforting and bring him happiness. And so he can't quite understand why the rest of the world, the rest of society, is telling him that he shouldn't be engaging in these things, that he shouldn't be having a fun time playing tea parties or, you know, doing these activities that are seen as traditionally girly. He just thinks, this is what I like to do, so why can't I do it? Like, I'm not hurting anyone. And that's a very valid point, but of course the rest of society has overly complicated matters, and now they're looking at him and expecting him to conform to these very arbitrary ideas. I did find it interesting to see this film attempt to explore those ideas. However, I do think that overall that exploration was quite surface level. It wasn't as deep as I wanted it to be, because first of all, the character of Sam isn't as complex as I wanted him to be to begin with. He just happens to like girly things or things that are traditionally targeted towards young girls, and that's pretty much the base of his character. Like, there's nothing really more to it. Everything else that we see from the character comes from the performance of the actor, from Ryder himself and his charisma, and to his credit, his great on-screen chemistry with Justin Timberlake. But in the writing itself, like, there's not much to the character of Sam other than he happens to be gender non-conforming and that he comes from a household that is plagued with so many issues and so much abuse. Other than that, he doesn't really have much agency in this story, so it's left up to the character of Palmer to kind of handle that, and his reaction to the fact that this kid is gender non-conforming, or he seems to enjoy things that are traditionally girly, is quite subdued. So whilst I did appreciate the fact that the film tries to tell the story of this child who doesn't quite fit in to the society that he is born into, and that, you know, people around him are judging him, bullying him, people of all ages, because they have nothing better to do anyway. People are bullying him, and it's heartbreaking to see the way that some people are treating him. But I do wish we could have gone into Sam's psyche a little bit more and try to understand what his thoughts are, what his reactions are to being treated this way by certain people in his society and his community, because we don't really get a lot of that. A lot of that is kind of passed on to Palmer, who, like I said, is quite a subdued character and doesn't really react emotionally most of the film until the very end, of course, where there's like emotional explosions, because there has to be, because it's that part of the film, I guess. I wish we could have gotten a bit more of an insight into his mind, basically, because he seemed quite stoic throughout, and like I said, I think Justin Timberlake did a good job of playing that kind of character character, but I think we could have gone even further and delved into his mind and see him as more of an emotionally intelligent character than we've seen before. I think that would have also helped the film stand out from the crowd, the growing crowd of films just like this. I'm tired of the emotionally stunted lead who, you know, plays it all close to the chest and doesn't really reveal much of his emotions until this adorable child comes into his life and changes things around, and all of a sudden he has a newfound purpose. Like, we need to be seeing more though. Like, we need more from each of these characters now, because there's just a sea of them at this point. And I think being able to see his emotions, his thought process, to the fact that he's taking care of this kid, more than just grunting, more than just sleeping with random women, more than just drinking. Like, if we've been able to see him fully digest this new life that he's living, I think it would have helped him stand out as more of a three-dimensional character. And another issue that I had with the film, it's its very quick wrap up at the end of it. I do feel like the first 2/3 took its time to establish the relationship between Sam and Palmer, and really took its time to explore Palmer's new life, you know, trying to figure out what he's going to do, and the hardships of, you know, gaining employment when he has a criminal record, and the fact that a lot of the people in this town know of him and know of the potential that he had when he was in high school and he was playing American football. And so to see how he fell off, to see how he ended up going to prison for 12 years, and he's faced with the reality that so many of these people were able to move on with their lives and achieve, you know, all of these other things that he wasn't able to while he was stuck in prison. Like, I feel like the first 2/3 did a good job of establishing all of that, and then at the very end there's just so much going on. There's so much thrown at us at the very end, with Sam and his living situation with his mother, and Palmer trying to take care of him and get legal guardianship over him. All of that happens at the very end is just rushed in there. It feels so jam-packed and crammed. And then at the very end, when we have our happily ever after, which again we could have predicted from the very beginning, that ending just feels so haphazardly done. Like, okay, it's time to end the story at this point. Let's just wrap it up with a neat bow and call it a day and go home, because this is pretty much the end point that we wanted to get to, so who cares how we get to it. And I think that's a mistake, because once again, when you have such a typical predictable story like this, it's all in the execution, and the director and the writer could have done so much more to make this feel so unique, so different from what we've seen time and time again. But still, even though, like I keep saying, I do think that this film was quite bland in the way that it was written and even directed, I do think that the two leads, you know, the relationship between these two characters does enough of a good job to kind of drive the story forward and have us connect with these characters on an emotional level, even though I do wish we would have dived into the themes of, you know, this gender non-conforming character a little bit more and explored where his headspace is at a little bit more, gotten to understand him as an individual as opposed to an accessory in Palmer's story a little bit more. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Palmer a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Palmer, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.